Okay, I can't believe this is our last one. It's been a lot of fun. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about what we discussed last time we were together, which was talking about how to deal with below the line behavior and convert that to above the line behavior. I think that's a big part of managing. And we talked a little bit about how that's where your credibility is gained or lost in those moments. But today we're going to talk about modeling, which is also a really important and I feel like sometimes overlooked part of leadership and of leading an environment. And before we hit the modeling section, I just wanted to open it up for anybody who had any questions about last week's session. And when you put a question into the chat, if you could put the question to go to everyone instead of just to Brett or I, and that way everyone can see the questions and we can work from there. So why don't we just jump right into the modeling section, and as questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat. And we'll
I
have
love
some
it.
time at the end too.
Becky, one of the things that we talked about is there was an NBA coach who played charades with his team at a holiday party, and everyone wrote their name down. And then he said it was an unbelievable experience for him to watch a future Hall of Famer reenact how he perceived his actions. Have you had anything like that happen to you?
Actually, yes, we've done it with our team before, where we've asked them to do, little like a TikTok, but a live TikTok in person of a teammate, and see if we could guess who the teammate was. And it's so funny because clearly you like exaggerate the person's characteristics when you're doing something like that, but it shows you what people think of you based on the characteristic they choose.
Well, and it reminds me of our first session when we asked Gonzaga, the basketball team, the best lessons they learned from their head coach. And they said that the lessons they picked up were how to be a great husband, how to be a great father. And he had not had any conversations with them about that. And when I asked the head coach how he interpreted that, he said that your actions are going to show where your values are. And that's from Mark Few. And one of Mark Few's good friends is actually your former colleague at Florida, Billy Donovan. And I asked Billy, I shared that story with him, and I said, how do you process that? And here's what he said.
If I was to walk around with a person for 48 hours and I was to look at that person's disciplines, I would be able to tell you what's important in that person's life. If somebody really wants to be in great shape and lose weight, I'll show you a disciplined person in terms of eating and working out. If I look at a guy and I see a marriage and his children really important to him, you'll see a disciplined person in terms of the investments that are being made there. And that's the hard part, is getting to a place of a value system of what's really important to you, and then being disciplined in those things that are important to you.
And if someone were to follow you around, Becky, for 48 hours, they're going to see all the different things in your life that maybe because you're on default setting, you're not necessarily aware of how much time you're wasting on social media or these things. And we try and challenge coaches. What's one thing that you would not want someone to see whenever, if they were to follow you for 48 hours or a week? Becky, we've gotten some great answers from that.
We have. I think nobody wants Billy Donovan following him around just because, like we all have things that we sort of want to keep to ourselves that we're not really proud of, but that we do. But I think when you put it in those terms and you think about like, okay, what if someone was, what would you do? What would you change? And maybe that's where we need to start in terms of our modeling.
It reminds me of a quote that someone said, that you can't see the label from inside the bottle. And so much of our actions, it's so easy for other people to see how we behave as opposed to what we are seeing, because we oftentimes grade people by their behavior and we grade ourselves by our intent. And when I was asking Tim Corbin, hey, what is the importance? How would you define modeling? Here's what he said.
Modeling is what people see. And you can communicate however you wish, but if you don't follow up in your actions by what you say, then you're going to cross some signals.
And I think that's really what you're trying to do, is to eliminate mixed signals. So if we go back to the Bill Belichick quote, when someone asked him this question, And he responded with this. It just shows that the most important thing is right now. And there's a consistency to him. And when I shared that with the athletic director, again, you love this tool, Becky, so much that if I want my team to be in the moment, then I need to be in the moment. And if we take those away, this is the ultimate modeling tool. And Becky, I just want to share something that someone said to me literally a couple of days ago. Question they would ask their leaders is, what if everyone did what you did? What's the significance of that question? And by the way, Becky and I are just riffing right now. Feel free. This is not canned. We don't believe in that. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. You want to comment, we'll challenge you with some things. But Becky, I know I didn't prep you on any of this stuff. When you hear that question, what if everyone did what you did? What is the significance?
Well, the significance to me as a leader would be like, man, I really need to think about what it is that I'm doing. And I need to think about that more, maybe than what I have thought about it. And crazily, like right now in my office, that if I want my team to blank, then I need to blank is written on my dry erase board. And I see it every day. And for me, that is such a good reminder of the modeling part of it being so important for what I do.
And if you go into some of the coaches that I work with, their offices or their homes, they have this in front of their mirror and they call it intention setting, that they look at that at the beginning of the day and really try and figure out what does the team need. And the person that helped with this tool is Mike Holder, the athletic director at Oklahoma State. And I asked him, how important is the leader's example? And here's what he said.
It's everything.
Expand on that.
Well, I think that's most prevalent when things go awry. You know, when you fail, when you face adversity. And for the coach to keep that in perspective and be able to harness all the anger, disappointment, embarrassment, all the human emotions and push those down and reach out to the player or players and offer them what they need in that moment, which is not what you're feeling. They're feeling the same thing. They're talking to themselves the same way. What they need is to hear a voice that lifts them up and inspires them.
Becky?
Well, it's true because, you know, it is everything. I mean, I think when he says that and you ask him to expand on it, like that's such a succinct answer, but it is everything because it doesn't matter what I do, especially in moments of crisis. It doesn't matter what I say if it's not aligned with what I do.
And one of the things that I love doing if I'm working with an athlete or a coach is start by asking them that question, how important is the leader's example? And then have them answer the question. And once they answer, then take someone who I've seen answer this question really well, play that next to the person's answer, and just ask them to observe the differences or the similarities. It's a great way to foster intrinsic motivation. And one of the things that Mike Holder said is the hardest thing about being the standard is you are the standard, that your actions set the value of the organization. And so if you want to get really practical, you can take a look at this performance and relational skills, the glossary, and pick out the 5 characteristics, the 5 values that you would want people to say, this explains who this person is. I feel these things on a daily basis. And then once you have your 5, you can start to build an identity around that. And eventually, again, it's all intention setting, is you just plug those words into this and figure out how to do that, because your actions are always sending signals. And going back to the very first section, this is what we'd like to avoid.
We can't have anyone freak out there, okay? We've got to keep our composure. We've come too far. There's too much to lose. We've got to keep our composure.
So if you think about what Tim Corbin just said, when your actions and words don't line up, you're going to cross signals. And we call that a mixed signal. And one of the things that I would challenge everyone to do while you're on the chat is think about some of the most common mixed signals that you see in your environment. If you could throw those in the chat, that would be great. And again, a mixed signal is anytime your words and actions don't align. So many coaches say focus on the next play, but they can't get past mistakes. There's the conflict, the words and the actions don't align. What are some of the most common mixed signals that you all see? We ask coaches, and here's the list of some of the more common ones that we saw. The themes emerged. And Becky, as you look at that list, I know you can relate, especially just not only from a personal standpoint, but observing all your colleagues at Florida.
Yeah, I mean, this list could be endless, I feel like. I mean, you think about times where you tell someone, calm down, and you say it in that tone, like clearly you're not modeling that behavior. But the don't take it personally and emotionally reacting to feedback, like we're saying something that we are not able to execute. And I think that credibility lapse is really important. Like people stop trusting us because we are saying something that doesn't align with what we're doing.
Do as I say, not as I do. And Becky, to your point on the feedback, if I want my team to be coachable, then I need to be coachable. And the irony with coaches, they're not very coachable, most of them.
This is true. And it's funny because the first thing they'll say about a player is, oh, he or she's not coachable. Like I can't teach her anything. And then you're trying to sit down with them and have a conversation about those mixed signals and they don't want to hear it.
Amen. And again, you're saying I can't teach them anything in that moment. And so then you're encouraging the team to get on board and get them on board. And there's so many mixed signals if you pay attention to the narrative, to the words that you use with your team. And the two that we're really going to focus on are the last two. Don't take it personal. And it's about the process. And this is a American football coach, college football coach, Chris Peterson, where I asked him, hey, when do you take things personal?
When a player lets you down, like on the things that and then they don't do what you ask them to do, and it's crossing the line, and you feel like, I don't know, you failed them, or how could you do this to me? And my wife probably has more wisdom than, four of me. She don't say, it's not about you. They weren't thinking about you. I said, that's the problem.
And of course, she's thinking, no, that's the problem. And I think it makes sense why Bob Stoops, another American football coach, said, what advice would you give your younger self? He said, don't personalize the mistakes made by others. Why do you think Bob went there, Becky?
Well, because I think you'll have a very short career in leading people if everything that someone else does is internalized by you. I'm sitting here at my desk right now, and I've had this on my desk every stop I've made, which is a little canister of Q-tips. And for me, again, it's just a reminder of Q-tip, quit taking it personally, because it's not about me. 9 times out of 10, the issues that come to me, even though they seem personal at the time and somebody might be personally attacking me, have to do with some external issue that I need to figure out a way to get to the bottom of. And I will never do that if I take it personally and fight fire with fire.
And so many coaches do that. And one of my good buddies, Jason, who I built a basketball academy with, he always said this. He said, the level in which we take things personal is directly correlated with how we lack perspective. And it's so easy to lose perspective inside the world of high performance. And here's an example of that. This is Sue Inquist on times she lacked perspective.
I have a lot of regrets, and one of them is actually throwing away a trophy. and getting caught. And when I look back at that in the moment and realize that I didn't have clarity on some of the things that you should never, ever, boundaries you should never cross.
And what happens is when you live in this world of focus, I mean, we're talking about it right now. There's a coach that just took another job. And you just heard from Bob Stoops, who said, don't personalize the mistakes made by others. Well, Lincoln Riley, who's an American football coach, just went from Oklahoma to USC, and they're going to pay him $12.5 million per year over 8 years. And upon leaving Oklahoma and doing what is best for his family in his mind, there is so much negativity on social media, traitor signs everywhere. And it's like, Becky, when Bob lost, and he was one of the most successful coaches of all time in Oklahoma, there would be for sale signs on his yard. So if you're doing a great job, better than it's ever been done before, you're getting for sale signs by that fan base. And then if you leave to pursue a better opportunity for your family, you're getting all this criticism and negativity. How do you process those two situations?
I think that this symbol that's on the screen right now just reminds me of, in any context, if you know, the only thing that is going to be acceptable is that, you know, you win at the highest level. So whether that's you are the top salesperson or you win a national championship, then everything else beyond that, like outside of that, isn't successful. And that's just a really tough way to live. And then as you talk about it with the two coaches pursuing other options, or just being a successful coach and people saying, yeah, but there's still one more level we can get to. It's like, you wonder why we have entitlement when our fan bases or the people who care about us, supposedly, are the ones that are saying these things.
Yeah, it's wild to me. And I think that it especially in high performance, perfectionism is rampant, and you focus on what you haven't done as opposed to what you have. And I heard a great line from an AD. He said that success is judged in the next 5 minutes. And it's so true. And I think about Mary Wise, who you worked with, and is an American volleyball coach. 2017, they have a remarkable season. She's National Coach of the Year. They lose in the championship game, and she gets back to her hometown of Gainesville, Florida, and this happened.
This was maybe a week after the championship, and we were waiting outside at a restaurant, and a gentleman, probably older than me, walked by, and he looked, and you could see, and he recognized me and went, hey, oh, that match, that was really rough. And then he just walked away.
You lived in that environment, Becky.
Yeah, when you're in a small town, like, you know, that's the one thing about athletics that I think separates it in some ways from other high performances, that it's so visible and it's on the ticker, you know, going across the bottom of your screen, you know, and that visibility makes it really difficult. You wonder why coaches go into, like, become reclusive or are paranoid. And it's because this feedback that they get, she's in the championship game, she's the coach of the year, but the person has to recognize the one thing, which was she lost the championship match.
And one of our favorite exercises to do with any high performer is asking them this question. And I would challenge you all. I know we're not getting a ton of interaction in the chat, so I'm going to challenge you all to weigh in on this one. If I was going to ask you all, how does society measure your success? How would you answer that question? If you could just, I
think this is an important question, because I think it'll give us a more context to your environment too. You know, I'd like to translate some of this from a sports environment into your high performance environment. So I think this is a really important question. Can you repeat that one more time, Brett?
Yep. How does society measure your success? If you could just throw that into the chat. What are some of the metrics society uses to determine whether or not you're successful? And as we wait for the chat, hopefully we'll get some participation out there. we're going to show you how coaches answer that question. And oftentimes, Becky, anytime we're working in the business sector, it is salary, it's title, it's status of company, it's the attractiveness of spouse, it's material possessions, it's visibility, fame, it's influence. And as you think of those things, Becky, there's so much crossover between sport and business.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that when you think about, wins and losses, that's easy. That's an easy translation, sales closed and not. Championships, like how often is your company number one, or are you number one within your company? Same with rankings. And players at the next level, I would imagine that if you are in charge of a sales force, how many of your salespeople are doing their best? So I just think the crossovers are immense.
They really are. And what I would challenge you to do if you're watching this back as a recording is get very clear on maybe the top 5 measurements that society uses. And then the next question I would ask you to do is just take a sheet of paper, and you can pause the video as soon as I get done asking this question, just to give some intentional thought behind it. If I was going to ask you to write 1 to 10 on a sheet of paper, so you'll have 10 answers and you'll just go as fast as you can. Doesn't matter the order. We'll do something with it in a second. If you're going to answer the same question 10 times, what's important to you? And it's about life in general. What answers would you put down? What's important to you? And here are some of the most common answers that we see. This is an example actually of Bob Stoops. These were the first 10 things that came to mind for him. And once you get your 10, and it could be more than 10, what I challenge people to do is to prioritize in order your top 5. So here were Bob's. And then what we do with that list is we take the 5 that are most important to us and stack it next to society's scorecard, how society measures success, and just look and observe. And what conclusions do you draw from looking at those 2 lists? And Becky, you've done this with so many coaches as well. What are some of the common answers you hear?
Well, first of all, there's not a whole lot of crossover. I think that 10 things exercise is really interesting. I just did it actually with a coach that was trying to decide whether she wanted to continue coaching or move into a different field. And when we started the conversation, she really had mixed feelings. Like she was kind of all over the place whether what she wanted to do. And then after she went through the 10 things, she saw that, the things that were important to her didn't really align with a coaching lifestyle. And I think it just gave her real clarity on what she wanted to do next based on that.
And so, Becky, as you're going through that exercise with her, talk through some of the commentary that followed the exercise.
Well, first of all, when we were doing the top 10 things, like it was easy for her to knock out like the top maybe 3 or 4. And then there was kind of like a little bit of a pause. And then she sort of got on a little bit of a roll again. And I think it really made her think a lot about what was important to her. And for her, she had just lost both of her parents and she had just bought a house. Well, coaching lifestyle means you're moving, and stability was something she was craving because of those 2 scenarios. And, that I think in itself was like a light bulb going off above her head. Is once she got clarity on what was important to her, it made the decision pretty easy.
And after you have that and she has her decision, there's probably a fear, right? So how do you talk through that with her?
I think for her, like, it was something that's all she had known. She's graduated, been a player, then a coach, and so she's been a coach now. She's, I think, 38. But I think at the same time, she probably the pull of coaching, like the emotional pull of coaching, didn't hold as much weight as she thought it would once she sort of organized her thoughts around what was important to her.
Isn't that fascinating? And we could break off here for just a second, Becky, because I saw a really impactful clip from a movie called Pig that Nicolas Cage stars in. And I think that this might be insightful for anyone. I would encourage you to watch the movie. Essentially, the scene you're going to see, Nicolas Cage, something was stolen from him. He was beat up. He's trying to find it. That journey leads him back into a restaurant where he confronts a student of his. Prior to living the simple life that Nicolas Cage is now living, he was regarded as the best chef in the city. So many people learn from him. And this is him having an honest conversation with one of the people that he taught.
This is the kind of cooking you like?
It's cutting edge. It's very exciting.
Exciting.
I mean, everybody loves it.
You like cooking it?
Absolutely.
Derek, what was it you always used to talk about opening and wasn't at a pub?
Everyone loves it here. This is a huge success.
Why didn't you open your pub?
I don't know that I really wanted. I mean, that was such a long time ago.
When I fired you, I asked you what you wanted to do. You said you have a few rooms upstairs. A real English pub.
Did I say that?
Yes.
Nobody wants pubs around here. It's just a terrible investment.
What was going to be your signature dish?
Liver Scotch eggs with a honey curry mustard.
They're not real. You get that, right? None of it is real. The critics aren't real. The customers aren't real. Because this isn't real. You aren't real.
Okay.
Derek, why do you care about these people? They don't care about you. None of them. They don't even know you. Because you haven't shown them. Every day you'll wake up and there'll be less of you. You live your life for them and they don't even see you. You don't even see yourself. We don't get a lot of things to really care about.
Becky, as you look into those eyes, is this the first time you've seen this clip, Becky?
It is the first time I've seen that clip.
So as you look into those eyes, what do those eyes communicate with you?
I think he knows he's lost himself, and he's doing everything in his power to justify that he hasn't, but he knows.
And so how do you think about the society scorecard? What's important to you? How does it relate to that?
I think the way it relates is that we chase these things that seem important and maybe are important to other people, like championships and, recruiting classes and things like that. But in the end, there is not much fulfillment in those things. And for him, he's chasing the critics and the in thing, but instead it's not him. He's never going to get fulfillment from that because it's not what he ultimately is.
And I think, to me, college coaching is sales. The NBA, you're dealt your talent in professional sport. In college, you're responsible for your talent. And the way you get your talent is to sell them on you and your program. And so think about how most coaches recruit, Becky. It's a veneer. It's not real. And because it's not real, people are signing up for a manufactured, curated image.
Well, image is the word that I was thinking of, because it's about, when you think about what you need to do to get people to come to you, it's all about things. It's not about like, hey, like if you really get to know me, you're going to see that I'm, a really caring person. It's more about, hey, we have the best facilities. We have the best ability to make you a pro. We have, it's all these things, but it's not internal.
And I think about going back to Tim Corbin, who is the Vanderbilt baseball coach and one of the most successful coaches in America. He was doing push-ups on the kitchen floor at 1:30 a.m. when his wife comes down and says, "What the hell are you doing?" And he just looks at her and he says, "I don't know." And he was struggling personally and professionally. And the last game hit him so hard because he was judging the success of the season on whether or not they won a championship. And she said something eerie to him. She said that if you don't find a different way to value what you're doing, you're going to die a miserable man. And that's ultimately why he started his classroom for his team, is so he could teach the lessons to them that he needed to learn. And if you think about it from a modeling lens, he's showing them what it looks like to be a great student of life. And what I'd like to show you is one of my favorite clips from Dave Chappelle. And it's exactly why he felt he needed to walk away from pain and from fame, because he left $50 million on the table. And he has a wonderful metaphor on why he did that.
I watched one of these nature shows one time, and they were talking about how a bushman finds water when it's scarce. And they do what's called a salt trap. I didn't know this. Apparently baboons love salt.
Okay.
So they put a lump of salt in a hole, and they wait for the baboon. The baboon comes, sticks his hand in the hole, grabs the salt makes his hand bigger, and he's trapped. He can't get his hand out. Now, if he's smart, all he does is let go of the salt. Baboon doesn't want to let go of the salt. Then the bushman just comes, takes the baboon, throws him in the cage, and gives him all the salt he wants. And then the baboon gets thirsty. The bushman lets him out of the cage. The first place the baboon runs to is water. Bushman follows him, and they both drink to their fill. And in that analogy, I felt like the baboon. But I was smart enough to let go of the salt.
So powerful, Becky. And one of the things I love asking coaches is, what is something that you're holding on to that you need to let go of? What is something that you're holding on to that you need to let go of? And so much of my work is focused on when there is a very clear goal, a measurement, and there is a conflict with the purpose, that causes some deep internal issues. And that's really where I spend the majority of my time. And maybe you can shed some light on why that's so rampant in American sport, Becky.
Well, I think when you think about why most people got into coaching, it was probably to, influence people because they were influenced by a great coach at some point. But then when you get into coaching and it becomes all about, winning championships and pursuing these goals, there's nothing wrong with the pursuit of them. I think the problem becomes is when it changes who you are and what your purpose was in doing it. And you see, I definitely see that a lot. I think people get caught up in the fame, just like, in a business context, you could get caught up in the money, you could get caught up in the things that the money provides you. And I think there's so many ways to justify it. Like, well, I've created this better life for my family. I've, got these material goods. I can do more for my kids than I could do for myself. But in the end of it, it's like, are you getting fulfillment from what you're doing? And like, I thought of this when you were showing the video of the chef, like his goal, maybe right now to win over the critics and have a very popular place, but his purpose with going into chef school never had anything to do with that. Nothing to do with that. And so he's gone far away and has this conflict from his purpose to his goal.
And I've heard some wonderful lines around these conversations. And probably my favorite is the why behind the goal is more important than the goal itself. The why behind the goal is more important than the goal itself. And if you think through modeling in this context, when your words and actions don't align, that's amateur, because there's no consistency and people have no idea what to expect. If you can align your words and actions, but the internal narrative with you is manipulative, then you're an actor. And I think, to me, competitive maturity is when you're able to get your words, actions, and thoughts to align inside a hyper-competitive, pressurized context. That shows you how hard it is to be authentic. And one of my favorite moments that we've ever had at What Drives Winning, our very first conference, we had the world's first sports psychologist, Dr. Jiminny, talk. And this was his very first line of the very first speech of our conference.
I want to ask you a question. How important do you think it is that you know what's the reason behind what you're doing at any moment? You think it's important?
It's obviously easy to graze over that, Becky, but how important is that?
Well, I think when you lose your why, you potentially lose your fulfillment, and it's certainly hard to be authentic when you lose your why. I mean, I don't even know how those two can exist together.
And I think about anybody that's going into a performance. If you don't have a game plan, you're going to be in trouble. And one of the coaches that I work with is a female golf coach. Her name is Shauna Estes Taylor. She coaches at Arkansas. And Shauna was an incredible athlete, but she developed rheumatoid arthritis, which made her put her clubs back in the bag. And she had an identity crisis because she didn't know who she was without being able to swing that club. That's where she derived her self-esteem. And having go through the darkness of what that entailed, of how she found herself, she wanted to give her players a different approach to where they could do that simultaneous to being an extraordinary athlete. And so what she did is she took one of the most powerful women that she's ever been around, who's an executive of a Fortune 500 company, and showed them this. And this is her game plan for life. As you can see at the top, she has her mission statement. She has the roles that she plays in life in order. Underneath, she has an intentional plan on how she's going to fulfill those roles in a way that ultimately she would be proud of on her deathbed. And at the bottom, she has the principles that she tries to live by and make decisions with. And again, this is just a mental model. And so that's what we wanted to give you all today, is a starting point. And you can rearrange it. You could do whatever you want. The only thing we would encourage is to have a game plan, that this is actually what you're performing, not whatever task or goal you're trying to achieve. You've done this with coaches, Becky. What have you witnessed?
I think what the biggest thing I've witnessed is the intentionality that it takes to put all these into place. Because, you know, when you're in a high performance environment of any kind, like, for example, let's just say one of the roles, let's pick number 5, is, you know, your job. That can get really big and supersede all of the others if you're not intentional about keeping it number 5 instead of number 1. And I feel like with coaching, it's just very, very easy for things to take the back seat. And if you don't want that to happen, which most people say they don't, then what is your game plan in keeping that alignment?
Becky, I think about how detailed business plans are. And it shows that we have the creativity to design a structure that is our true north, it's guiding principles. Why do you think more people don't do this for their own life, yet they'll do it for an organization?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think that we sort of think about how these things are going to fit together in an afterthought as opposed to a forethought. And, you know, one of the things that I think is terrific about this is it's not just putting this on a piece of paper. It's creating a way that you can hold yourself accountable to it. And I was talking to a group of people the other day. They all did this as a staff, and monthly they check in with each other and they say, hey, you know, I'm not sure that you were really fulfilling role number 2 to the highest because you skipped this event that was part of that role to come to a game or to go to a practice or to spend one more time watching a recruit. And so it sort of guides your actions. This paper makes you think about it, but you need other people to help you guide your actions, I think.
There's no doubt. And maybe that's where we can end, is thinking about a roadmap for modeling. And I think the very first low-hanging fruit is to align words and actions. And all you have to do is ask people around you, what do I need to keep doing? What do I need to stop doing if I want to accomplish this first step? And get some 360 feedback. The second would be to develop your game plan, whatever it looks like. Ours is just a suggestion, a starting point. You can create however you want to do it. It needs to be yours. And then lastly, how do you create an accountability system where you can revisit and shore up some of the gaps? Because if you're in a high performance arena, that can overwhelm the rest of your life, to where if you don't have a structure in place, it can become an afterthought. And so many coaches that I work with in their 50s have a trail of tears behind them because they constantly rationalized that they were making a better life for their family when all they wanted was for them to be around and present with them with whatever they were doing. I know that's a story you've heard also, Becky.
Over and over and over. And I just want to emphasize one thing about this, because we're talking a lot about, you know, making things important that are important to be really important to you. That doesn't take away from your ability to pursue goals or to be competitive. And I think there's a misalignment idea about that. Like, it's just about being intentional about when you're doing what. So for example, if I'm at home, I'm intentional about spending time at my home with the people in my home, and they have my full intention. And when I'm at work, I'm going hard after the goals that I've set for myself. But it actually allows you to sort of take away the distractions. Like, I'm not worried about what other people think about the job I'm doing, because I'm able to focus on my authentic idea and purpose of what the job is for me.
Amen. I don't know what else to say.
I want to say one thing just about modeling, because, you know, I know that no one put in the chat about mixed signals, but I hope that you've given some thoughts to what are mixed signals. And I hope that you will have someone in your life that can help you with that quote we said, you can't see the label from inside the bottle. So from my own experience, you know, I've had a couple people that I've worked with that have been willing to give me good feedback. Brett's one of them. But there's not often been times that I have reacted well to that feedback. Sometimes I will be like grouchy about it or pushing back on it. But then when you have somebody who will continue to give you that feedback despite the pushback or despite the fact that you react poorly to it, you need to treasure those people in your life, because a lot of people will stop giving you the feedback if you push back on it. So I call it a truth teller. Like, trying to find who is your truth teller. That probably can be somebody that you're close to, but it could also be somebody that is not quite like your spouse or your best friend, because sometimes that little bit of distance really helps too. But I think the truth teller person in our lives is a really critical person if you're serious about getting better.
No question. And Becky, I'm going to throw it to you. We wanted to leave about 10 minutes for Q&A based on what we've talked about today and really the other sessions too. And so if anybody has a question, they can throw it into the chat and we can curate.
Yeah, I really would encourage any questions that you all have about today's session or past sessions if you've been on. To me, when we talk about this What Drives Winning Environments, this is a class that I teach at Florida right now, and we are just ending the semester. And it's been a really interesting experience to see how some people in my class are just young students that are 22, 23 years old, and some of them are experienced people who have been in the field for a while. But how they interact with this for the first time, I would tell you this: I've been coaching for 33 years, and this information for me could help me in year 33, regardless of my experience level. So hopefully you have felt the same way with the information that we've passed on, because it just gives you all these points of reflection to see if you're on the right track. We got no questions, Brett. We must have just answered everything right off the top. I know you guys might have something that you're afraid to, Brett likes to invite you into the question and then ask you more about it. If you want just a question where I will read the question and then Brett will answer it and you don't have to do any of the talking, we can do that too. So feel free to put that in the chat if you have any. In the meantime, while we're waiting for that, Brett, I want to say that, we talked about defining at the very beginning. We talked about managing both above the line, catching above the line, and converting below the line. And then we talked about modeling. In your experience, I know it's really hard to question here, but in your experience, if you had to say this one place needs the emphasis, what would you pick?
I would say the system of all of them, all three: define, manage, and model, because when something goes wrong, it gives you a place to start. And anxiety goes away when you start getting into a strategic mindset. And so if something's not going according to plan, you then have a chance to ask yourself, have I defined it well? Yes or no? Have I managed it well? Yes or no? Have I modeled it well? Yes or no? And depending on how you answer those questions, that gives you your next step, and you can find peace of mind with that next step.
And that sort of flows right into this question that Scott has asked. Can you explain anything that is expected must be defined?
I think that people want feedback and they want to understand the norms of the environment. And so if you're going to place an expectation on someone and not give them reasoning on what it looks like and why it's important, then that's going to cause a lot of confusion, because they're going to see it's exactly what Tim Corbin just said. If you have a negative reaction to a behavior that you haven't gone over, it will be confusing to that individual. But if you've covered it on the front end, it's just like sunscreen versus aloe. That if you put on the sunscreen prior to, you're going to deal with a lot less pain on the backside. And so the more you can define, hey, here's how we do things up front, the less you're going to have to manage, and the less you're going to minimize confusion inside your environment.
And I'm going to ask Julianna's question in a second, but I just wanted to share with you, I was working with a coach last week, and she's a new coach, first year. And the issue was that someone had taken a Sharpie and written on the floor of the volleyball gym, just like signed their name or a number or something like that. And this coach was like over the top livid about the situation. And so she was talking about, like, because it's the end of their season. So she was talking about having like a, end of the fall cleaning day. And then she was talking about this situation, and she got so distracted by this situation. And she's like, well, we're going to just clean everything. We're going to, like, and so now, like, I was trying to have this conversation with her about, okay, so of course, like, should people know to not use a Sharpie to write on a gym floor? We can probably all agree the answer to that should be yes. But now if she's going to take this cleaning day, which was part of something she wanted to do, and make it part of like a punishment, it's seemingly getting some mixed signals as far as, is the cleaning day important, or are we just being punished for someone writing with a Sharpie on the volleyball floor? So back to mixed signals, but let's hit Julianna's question. Julianna, I'm glad you asked a question because you've asked some good ones so far. So this one says, where should we start to identify our own true key values for modeling? How can we know what our truth is when we are influenced by so many factors around us? Ooh, that's a deep one.
I would start there. It's so often we can be our best coach if we create the platform for it to happen. And so the fact that Julianna is asking that question tells me that the answer is within, because that question is, people tell you everything by what they ask, Becky. And that tells me that this resonates in a way that you have to separate and figure out what is most important to you. And I think that, to me, it's reverse engineering is probably the strategy I would use. So what do you want? If people were going to speak at your eulogy, what would you want them to say? If you were going to go out to your anniversary with your spouse, if you're married, what would you want that card to say? If your parent was going to celebrate you and give you a card for Father's or Mother's Day, what would you want that to say? Once you have a clear vision of what's most important to you, then you can start to build some intentionality around the actions to make sure that that role is fulfilled, much like how you would build a business plan, which I'm sure you've done.
And I think I would also add to that, Julianna, that the outside factors are real. We can't take away outside factors like the pressure that there is to win or hit a certain sales number or anything like that. But how we deal with that is also real. And I think that's our choice. We don't really have a choice over how people view our performance, but we have a choice of how we interact with our own ability to get to that performance.
No question.
All right. Anybody else? We've got time for one more question. Looks like we've covered it all, Brett. We've finally done it. It's like Elf when he says, world's best cup of coffee. You've finally done it.
Well, I guess in closing, Becky, what I would hope is that we stimulated thought around how you can define, manage, and model your expectations to where whatever you're building, the people that are inside of that ethos want to be a part of it. And if you can focus your energy on that and say yes to that, a lot of the stuff that pulls you, you'll naturally say no to, because you'll see the true value that it holds, which is not much, and the temptation will start to drop. And when that temptation starts to drop, what's insane is the results kind of start getting better, because you're not so bogged down by anxiety and worry on how this is going to happen. You're focused on the stuff that matters, and that leads to the other stuff.
And I think the last thing I would add with the whole series of all 4 sessions is that as I've told you, I'm teaching this class, right? So I know this information. Brett and I created it together. We've been going through it over and over again. But even again, like teaching this information, I feel like I pick up little pieces here and there. So I'd highly recommend like going back and watching the sessions, taking some notes, really paying attention to what resonates with you. And if you can do that in a group setting with people that you work with, that's even more amazing, because you can just brainstorm. I think that's where Brett and I do our best work, when we brainstorm. And the question came up here, Brett, where can we go to find out more information on the content?
whatdriveswinning.com. And if you go under the tab, what we do, there are so many videos that you can access there for free that you could show your teams. And then if you do, our goal is to create content to where you can show something and then just say thoughts, or how does this apply to us? And then that bursts a conversation that is meaningful and that will impact change around your environment.
And it takes away the anxiety of you feeling like you have to teach the material. The material is the teacher. You're just curating a discussion. And I think that's sometimes holds people back from having these kind of discussions, because some of them go pretty deep. But it's really just getting the ball rolling with the people that they need something to get the ball rolling. And I think that's what this information provides.
Awesome. We want to be very respectful of your time. It was so nice hanging out with you all, and we hope to cross paths again soon.
Thanks, everybody.